top of the hour. We've got a really great webinar in store for everyone. So as we look to explore how to choose the right content management system for your digital design content. So really excited to speak with everyone today. A little bit of housekeeping here. So for everyone listening, please feel free throughout the webinar to ask any questions that you may have in the Q&A section of the WebEx. So if you go into your WebEx in the top right-hand corner is that little Q&A button. Go ahead and I see some of you are already using it there. Go ahead and ask your questions, and we're going to try to answer your questions throughout the webinar as well as at the end. Okay. This presentation is also going to be recorded, and it's going to be sent to all who registered, so feel free to share it with your colleagues and so forth. So I'd like to introduce Luke Johnson, author of WhatRevitWants blog and an Autodesk Expert Elite member. Luke performed a very extensive research on content management solutions that he's going to share with all of us today. Luke's a very well-respected member of the design community. His blog is probably one of the most popular in the industry, and he also speaks at several different industry events around the globe. So Luke, how are you doing today?
I'm going really good, thanks. Looking forward to talking about this topic with all of the guys and girls out there, and yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Wonderful, yeah, good to speak with you again. And myself, Steve Germano, I currently serve as the Director of Strategy here at Unify, exploring new product ideas and various business development efforts. All right, so let's kick things off with what do we consider content, right? Content's kind of that ambiguous term. Most of our listeners are very familiar with Revit, and Revit content in general is described as Revit families. But there's many other types of elements within Revit, such as details, system families, schedules, legends, and others that I would consider to also be content, okay? So in addition to Revit, design firms also use many other tools to do their jobs, and each tool comes with the inherent challenge of requiring content in its workflow. You know, there's AutoCAD blocks, there's GDL objects and ArchiCAD. Bentley has its own content. It's also compatible with Revit families as well. We kind of amass a lot of content just naturally for our production software of choice as a firm. So even before production, we can kind of look at the very beginning of a design lifecycle where visualization is really taking off in our industry currently with VR technologies. And architects are virtually walking their customers through the early conceptual designs. You know, all of these different tools require content as well, and that virtualization or that VR type of content is even more detailed typically, or higher LOD than what you would see from a lot of our production level software and content. So all of these tools require content. Some are downloaded from across the web, some we create in-house, others we pay third parties to make for us. And so, Luke, you're a real advocate of VR technology. Are you kind of seeing a shift in firms moving from the stilled rendered imagery to a more game engine type solution with VR?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing it in our industry here. We've used VR effectively on a few healthcare and laboratory projects, you know, very detailed projects where the client wants to see what they're going to get, and VR just does that so well. But what we've found on the, I guess, the creation side of those experiences is that you need to have access to the right content. Otherwise, you just spend so much time building, you know, the content, the families, managing it, instead of just focusing on what you should be focusing on, which is that VR experience and making it enjoyable for the user.
Yeah, exactly. That experience is why, you know, so many different gaming engines are starting to get ported over and utilized in this space, and it's a pretty exciting time. We're seeing lots of different, you know, VR is becoming very accessible. The price points are coming down, so you're seeing the technology kind of start to become more commonplace. And then one of my passions is actually AR and seeing, you know, how we can use augmented reality in the workplace. And so being out on construction sites, there's lots of cool tech going on there, and still needs a little bit more time to mature, but lots of fun stuff happening in that space. So content management is not really a new concept, right? And there's several different CMS systems or content management systems out there. There's several different DAM systems, digital asset management solutions, all across other various industries. You know, we see this very commonly in marketing assets that are used, and these systems are used in all different types of companies. So I would say it's relatively new in the building industry, but it seems to be very globally accepted as an area of our business where we can really raise the efficiency of our firm if a good strategy is implemented. So every firm has two primary choices when it comes to content management. We can ignore it, stick to the tried and true method of digging through shared network Windows folders, right, and our kind of our nested Windows folders there, or we can implement a CMS system, okay? And there's many different case studies out there that are now showing the ROI and the value to be gained by a CMS system, really no matter the firm size. So we have some really good objective data there to kind of start to look at. Here's a few different approaches that several different software vendors have taken to managing content. There's kind of a loose local file system-based approach. There's a more strict local file system-based approach. There's a centralized WAN file system-based approach. And then there's also a cloud-based content management approach. So a couple different flavors, all attempting to solve the same problem. But as with anything in life, we have choices. And with multiple software vendors all working hard to supply valuable tools to the marketplace, in the long run, this is really great for us as a consumer. So the more competitors out there, the higher rates, it increases the rate of innovation because each competitor is going to try to create new features to stay up with each other. And the more choices we have, just the better for the industry, in my opinion. Would you also agree with that, Luke?
Yeah, for sure, because if you've been involved in Revit or kind of BIM management for a few years, you probably remember when there was only one or maybe two of these content management tools out there. Now we have quite a few more, and they are each progressing in their maturity. They offer slightly different features and performance, and just having that competition is great for the companies and the end user of these content management systems. So it was really a perfect time to do this kind of research project as well.
Yeah, and so this kind of leads to the big question of, how do we make a choice? How do we choose the right system for us, for our firms? And what items are really specific to my firms should I be considering when comparing the available approaches out there? So the intent of this research project is to take really look at this from a logical and methodical approach and perspective to comparing these various platforms, being as objective as possible about this data. So some of the solutions that we took a look at to evaluate here are some of the leading platforms that are in the industry. And so we've got Avail, we've got BIM Object, Content Studio, CTC BIM List. They have two flavors here. They have an on-premise local version, then they have a cloud version, and then our Unify application here as well. Luke, did you want to comment on these solutions and how these were or why these particular solutions were selected?
Yeah, just from a general point of view, some people may be wondering about BIM Object. So that's really kind of a ribbon that grew out of Autodesk Seek that connects you to manufacturer content. But at this stage, it doesn't let you manage your own content. So, its scope is a little bit different in terms of the research. The CTC tools, as you mentioned, there's two kind of different flavors, but the actual user side is very similar. So the add-in that people are using to interact with, whether it's the on-premise, the Revit kind of server version or the cloud version, the user experience is very much the same. The other kind of three there, Avail, Content Studio, and Unify, they each are quite powerful in their own respect, and they have a large user base relatively around the world. So they were kind of a no-brainer to include here.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Luke. So when we approached Luke about this project, initially we knew this was going to take a pretty significant amount of Luke's time and resources to thoroughly test every aspect of these platforms, and thus Unify commissioned Luke to do so in an effort to really, for Luke to really be able to allocate enough time as it was going to take to be as thorough as he wanted to be in this type of a project. So we really wanted to know, how do we objectively stack up as Unify? How do we objectively stack up against the competition? Where do we need to focus our efforts to improve? And we constantly have this internal reevaluation of our software, of our different departments internally here. It's kind of a company thing that we do. And so we really want to get good feedback here so that we could adjust, okay, and so that we can continue to improve. And so, Luke, do you want to take a quick minute to kind of talk about why you decided to take this project on and fill our listeners into the approach that you took into this research study?
Yeah, so I, in general, really enjoy working closely with software developers of various BIM softwares, and often I'll share feature suggestions or bug reports with them and try to help them to improve their software. But in this instance, I kind of had I guess, a personal interest in it as well, because I'd worked with a few of the different content management solution providers over the years. I knew personally how difficult it could be to choose the right system for your firm. I had worked through Revit implementation at quite a number of architectural firms in the past and recently, and so I knew that having access to this research would help me personally to be able to recommend to these firms, hey, this is what this one does and this is what this one does, and I wanted to do a really thorough job so that it could be useful to as many people as possible.
And so what are we looking at here on the screen? How many? I know there's a lot of different things that you tested. Like, you want to talk about the breadth of the test that you actually ran through, and how many different tests and things like that?
Yeah, as you can see there, it mentions 150 plus features analyzed. So I basically had a line item per feature, let's say, but then I had to break that down into major categories. So we started breaking up into things like management-specific features, user-specific features. What about added value? What is the company who creates the project or the software bringing to the equation? And so that was just on the feature side, and so we created this big matrix. We said, this particular feature is worth so much, and we went through and created like a weighting value and applied that equally across each platform. And then we did other things like testing. We did speed testing, testing against scale, how do they handle huge libraries. We used a number of different test systems, some with a very high internet bandwidth, some, which were kind of working out of Australian internet, which was a little bit slower. So we really did, or I personally spent a lot of time trying to make this as thorough as I could, so that I could really stand behind the results.
Yeah, it was a really great job. I mean, when I first took a look at this data, I was pretty blown away about how much data there was. And so over the next several slides, what we're going to do is take a look at some of the key areas and feature comparisons and kind of summarizing the data behind the scenes here. So let's go ahead and start off with the BIM Manager features and tools that are available to each platform. With the firms, with all firms, a BIM Manager, or if you're a large firm, a group of BIM managers globally are really the folks who are driving standards firm-wide. So it's really important for these folks to be empowered with great tools to do their jobs and enforce those standards. And so, Luke, do you want to kind of walk us through the various columns that you have here, giving us a description of what was tested?
Yeah, so kind of in management terms, it kind of breaks down to a few different things, which is how are people using the content, and also other kind of more technical things, which is how do I deploy this software into my firm? What kind of information am I going to be able to access on the management side? So we had things like content and usage analytics, focusing on how much each piece of content is used, and are there dashboards available? We had things like SSO, or single sign-on support, Citrix support of the actual software itself. And then other features like, how is content requested, or can we add more metadata to individual pieces of content that lives outside of the content? And so just those more advanced features that empower a BIM manager to be able to do a better job with managing the content.
No, that's great. Thanks, Luke. And so in your opinion, what's kind of the most important ones here that is kind of something that you want to make sure everyone's kind of aware of?
Yeah, so I think revision history is really important, because you want to be able to go back and figure out what happened with this piece of content. So a lot of the tools don't kind of keep revision history, particularly if they don't actually store the content itself. So if we look at something like Avail and the local version of CTC, they're essentially like an index of the content. So they're letting you search across the content that's stored on your file server, but but they're not putting the content into that system. So when we put the content into a cloud system, something like Unify or CTC Cloud, it's able to store the revisions, and you can start to think of how powerful that is in management terms.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised personally. Like, coming from a large firm background, I was kind of surprised to see that there's not a lot of systems out there that are actually including revision history. I mean, a true CMS system, if you look at traditional other systems in different verticals, revision history is a very important thing. So understanding who and why and when those files were changed over time. So I think that's an important point. Everyone has some form of analytics integrated into their platforms, which tells me personally that it's a very valuable thing for managers, a valuable feature set. So which solution or solutions stand out here in this particular area?
Yeah, we're noticing a lot of firms starting to use different platforms for analyzing just general information about everything, their models, their clashes, and that kind of thing. So people are often using Power BI or other tools on their own company side to do different things like this.
I love BI.
And yeah, it's great. Yeah, so Avail has actually quite an interesting system where they utilize Google Analytics, and they kind of provide that as part of a service along with their management system. And so they're kind of opening up the data to you, and then you can decide how you want to interact with it. So that's quite a flexible system, quite interesting. The other tools, honestly, like the analytics, are quite basic. They just have very, very simple things like this is how many times that piece of content has been loaded, and so it's useful, but not as useful as like a full-featured dashboard. And that's what Unify gives you. So it kind of comes with batteries included, let's say, that it just works out of the box. The Unify Analytics dashboard gives you all that information at your fingertips, and you don't have to kind of spend a lot of time setting it up yourself.
Right. Yeah, I'm just going back to BI. Big shout out to Power BI. If you guys haven't checked that platform out, there is a free version. It's really, really powerful, really flexible. We're seeing all sorts of usage for data visualization nowadays, no matter which platform you look at. And like you said, folks are doing visualization on data pulling out of their project models. We're using it for data visualization of across our entire content libraries for content analysis purposes and audit purposes. So yeah, data visualization's a big thing nowadays, just to really be able to visualize large quantities of data, right, and make informed decisions. So moving on here to feature comparison. So in addition to powerful BIM management tools, it's equally, if not more important than that every end user, every designer or modeler throughout a firm has a really good experience with using a product, right? So if our users don't like to use a tool, and it's not making their lives easier or their jobs easier, it doesn't really matter how great the admin tools are. It's never going to get adopted firm-wide. We can't really force them to use it as much as we would like to try as BIM management, right? So Luke, what are your thoughts around some of the user experiences here from each product?
Yeah, so if we think about each one individually, Unify has their standalone app that kind of sits there and does everything, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. BIM Object pretty much just has a ribbon that it is a little bit hard to navigate, and as we said before, the free kind of version just connects you to manufacturer content, so it's not letting you manage your own content. If we go to Content Studio, it's quite a mature product now. I think version 6 is definitely out there, and it's giving you a nice experience because it's spent a lot of time in development, obviously. And CTC Cloud and CTC, as we mentioned before, they kind of have an in-pane or a dockable Revit dialog, and Avail has that as well. And I like that approach with some of these systems where, okay, you're working in Revit as a user, but I don't necessarily I don't want to be distracted from my experience. I want it to be as smooth as possible. So I think it's nice having that in-pane browser for your content. I think it works quite well in those systems to encourage users to interact consistently with the software. I think one thing you struggle with when you're implementing these systems is really bringing users on board. So you want to have it to be just as easy of an experience as possible. And so if we go back again to Unify, I think that the Windows app that it has, it's really very mature, and it's really a very fully featured tool. You know, it includes everything to do with kind of managing your content in that one app. You can download the content, you know, batch download, batch load the families into the project. You can upload, batch extract from your project. You can manage the libraries, manage the users, request the content. It just really connects to so much information in that one application, and I think it's been done in a really effective way.
Yeah, it's funny looking at this chart here. I see you know, Unify's comments area is you know, we only have partial functionality there. We really, you know, don't have full-fledged comment system, and it's something that, you know, we've had on our list to bang out here for a while. And it's funny because looking at our customer ideas portal, it's the #1 thing that's requested. I think it's got the highest ratings on it, or highest rankings on the total amount of requests on there right now. So yeah, this is really good to take a look holistically across these different platforms. Everything has you know, different pros and cons to it, and you know, it's like you said. One thing I think personally is really important is that overall UI. It's something where, you know, our dev team here at Unify will tell you, I harp on them consistently over the design of an application, and our ability to really interact with it as humans is almost more important than the computer functionality behind it, right? You can have all this power in the cloud, but if I don't have a good, easy UI to interact with it, then it's not very useful, right? So I personally think Avail and Unify do a really wonderful job in that area. They're great-looking applications. What are your thoughts on that, Luke?
Yeah, I would agree. I think the Avail application, it's very user-friendly. It's pleasing to look at and pleasing to work with, and so I think they've done a really nice job bringing that to the stage that they have, you know. And it's got some interesting kind of, I guess, workflow things where you've got this one add-in piece, and then you've got the application piece, and they kind of talk to each other. So that's kind of interesting. But you know, I think Unify have simply had to. You guys have had to develop your app just a bit more, because you know, you're handling more features kind of within that. So you've had to try to control the level of complexity. I think you've done a pretty good job. Like the Unify application, it just gives you a lot of power, but you don't feel daunted by it. So I think that helps bring the users on board.
And it's so much harder from the software development perspective to make complexity simple, right? To guide the user through the application. And you know, I personally think there's a lot of areas for improvement in our application, Unify, but it's something we spend a lot of time on. You know, it's just inherent. There's a lot of complexity in what we do in the BIM world. Trying to keep that simple for the everyday user. So, like you said earlier, they don't have to think about the tools, and the tool just kind of works for them. It's a very challenging thing, but yeah, that's why we spend the extra time on our side to try to make that stuff easier. Another key aspect is how files are kind of inserted, and that tight integration into our workflows, or lack thereof, right, with the design applications, like Revit primarily. How do these different solutions kind of handle the insertion of content into those models, you know, add-ins versus downloaded or inserted, or however they handle it?
Yeah, so with the exception of the systems that are storing your content in a cloud, as we said before, the other tools are basically providing a system of indexing the content that's still living on your internal file server or file system. So, you know, key things are knowing as much as you can about a piece of content prior to inserting it, and the ability to dig down deeper into that if necessary, or you look at that content and say, that's the thing I want, and we'll load it straight into Revit. So I think it's cool to see Content Studio, how much integration, Revit integration they have. You know, they've been around for quite a long time in the industry, and they've just built out little bits and pieces to bring themselves in alignment with Revit as much as they can. But I think it's also a bit concerning how some of these tools are relying on the file system every time, you know, a user wants to add content, because, you know, it does happen that file servers experience difficulties, or they go down for maintenance, or, you know, what if someone, you know, you haven't locked things down enough and someone accidentally deletes or renames a family file kind of on the file server. these other systems are relying on it. So that's where, CTC Cloud and Unify, because they've got the content there in the cloud, accessible globally, it's a secure cloud server, it's the Unify interaction with that cloud data, it's very fast, it's predictable, and so your users are not going to have this logical disconnect of, oops, something broke. It's kind of just going to be, has a high availability.
Yeah, and there's some companies out there that are still kind of worrisome about the cloud, about security. We still hear that from time to time as well, but and I think a lot of that just happens to be the maturity of our industry in general, right? Like if you have a black site or you have a particular type of project that's under NDA, that makes sense. That we understand that, but it seems like more and more services are moving to the cloud these days, and it's kind of an area where we can really take advantage of some extra computing power, right? So I think there's some good value there as well. So here we're kind of looking at another area that you explored where, with support and added value, and this has really nothing to do with the software itself, but more the vendor's ability to provide various services and support around that software. And so, Luke, do you want to kind of talk about these different areas and how they were ranked and weighted here?
Yeah, so looking across here, as you said, we're looking at things like support. Does the company offer any kind of audit services? What kind of licensing systems are they offering? Are they integrating with manufacturer content? Can we request content from within the product that then gets fed back to our family creation team, let's say? So part of the research really was to consider the cost versus benefits of each product, and that includes some of these elements, obviously, as you can imagine. And so I think Unify has this distinction of offering the audit services. It's something that they can offer because they've taken your content, they've put it into a cloud where they have a huge amount of processing capability, and that just takes some headaches away from the BIM Manager. A lot of us have spent time developing batch tools to try and figure out what's broken with this parameter, or why isn't this family upgrading, or when you can outsource that a little bit and give it to Unify to give you back some audit results, that's just going to give you more time in your day. And as I think you mentioned before, the ideas portal that Unify provides, it does show how you guys are interested in your user base and how they're how they want the product to grow. And I've spent quite a bit of time on there discussing features and with other BIM professionals. So it's a nice space to kind of work in and see how that's developing with each version. And just to shout out Avail quickly as well, they offer a nice system of growing the license or user base as per the demand in your company. So you kind of buy this many licenses, and as your user base grows during a license period, they kind of let it float and then rectify it later. And so some of the other providers are adopting those similar flexible licensing systems as well. And just to mention the manufacturer content as well, a lot of us have to interact with third-party or manufacturer content. We build really nice families that kind of it complies with our company standard and it's doing everything right. But then you have to load in manufacturer content, and sometimes that's a little bit of a different story. And so Unify, it does an interesting thing because we can kind of connect to a manufacturer channel, let's say, of some of this stuff, but then we can bring it into our library and start to manage it a bit more effectively and start to modify it, make it match some of our company standards. And so that's quite a unique approach, which I think is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's interesting about the third-party content. I kind of snickered there because when I was a BIM manager, I actually had blocked certain sites at the firewall from IT. I said, I don't want anybody going to Revit City and downloading stuff. I don't want anybody going to XYZ website and downloading stuff where I knew there was really kind of poor quality content. So yeah, Unify's kind of approach there is to take a little bit different spin and provide information, provide control, provide the users with choice as to what content they feel is quality. Right? We're not going to play world police on content quality. you know, one man's trash is another man's treasure. So we're gonna leave that up to each firm to make that decision. But yeah, some fun things we're doing in that area for sure.
Yeah,
all
there's
right, thanks for
a
that.
lot of SketchUp imports into families floating around over there, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. It's interesting though, right? Because a lot of firms, they need a ton of SketchUp content because they're doing early visualization stuff there and early conceptual designs there, right? Some are using Format now. Some are wanting Max and Maya assets. So every workflow is different at different firms, and you know, I can't say that any two firms are identical. And so that's why, you know, we kind of take the approach of let's be very flexible, let's be very malleable, and give you a platform to really match your firm workflow instead of you kind of having to adopt to our workflows, right? So, so this next slide is, it's like the bane of my existence, like bugs, bugs, bugs. It's something like every platform, I don't care what software vendor says that they can, there's just no way around it, right? When it comes to software, you may say you have no bugs in your platform, it's impossible. I just don't believe it. It's like every software's got bugs. You set up, as a software vendor, you set up processes, you set up procedures to attempt to mitigate them. They always find a way into production releases. And we have like 4 stages before production here at Unify, and bugs still make it through. It's kind of like RFIs and change orders, right? We work to eliminate those things. BIM's supposed to help us eliminate those things, but they always end up popping up on every job. Something ends up happening or slipping through the cracks. So new software takes time to mature. And I remember kind of the early days of Unify 5, 6, 7 years ago. You know, it was honestly, it was pretty painful. Like software just takes time to mature. You can't just design it, code it, and stick it out there. You learn over time, just like we do, and learning how to design better buildings over time. So it takes time to mature and become what we call quote unquote stable. So let's talk a little bit about what some of these ratings mean and how these tests were produced in this particular experience slide.
Yeah, so just to begin with, you know, the testing happened over a number of months, and we did a lot of tests, and you know, we were trying to identify issues. So as you can see there, you know, the scale of the graph is only hitting about 25 issues, you know, for some of those tools. So it's not like they're unusable. It was just we pushed things to figure out how they performed, and if something just didn't perform in a way that I was expecting, or you know, something did crash or whatever, that was like, okay, we're gonna chalk that up, no matter which software that it happened on. So we really wanted to push the limits of these platforms to see how they could scale and handle really large data sets. And as you know, it's at those times you start to identify just some issues, some bugs that maybe the dev team are working on. So I worked with some of those companies, you know, during the research, even to share some of this information back to them to show, you know, this was an issue that I had, and a lot of them have picked it up, and they're obviously trying to work on those and correct them as well. So in the case of Avail at the time, you know, a couple of months ago, it was struggling a little bit with a very huge data set that I used. So the data set that I used to kind of see where things would break was about 18 gigabytes. It had just over 31,000 pieces of content, like Revit families. And some of these tools, you started to identify what was the slow point, or where were things not quite working. And so, like in the case of Avail, that experience was to do with it was syncing like an index to the cloud, and until that index kind of got crunched and synced, to use a few funny words, but basically until that happened, it wasn't kind of quite working as it probably should. Content Studio, the testing that we did, it spanned across a couple of versions, because I think we started on version 5 of Content Studio, and then the version 6 was released during the testing. And you know, you can understand how that may have been ironing out some UI kind of things during that time. And so the Unify score here, like as you can see, you know, we did pick up at least one thing that happened during that testing period, but in terms of comparing it with the others, it shows how it had kind of minimal issues or bugs present, even when we were doing these tests of scale and pushing it as much as we could. And you could kind of see, you know, this was an enterprise grade tool that had faced a lot of testing and development over a number of years. Yeah,
and I think that's it, right? Like any, you know, to Avails Credit is a little bit of a newer application on the marketplace, and it's made some really good progress really quickly. It's a very very nice toolkit and feature set, but it's going to have some issues as well as pretty much any software that's just new. It just takes time to mature. So yeah, this is a very interesting set here, and like I said, several years ago, and Luke, you probably remember in the early days of Unify too, there were just inherent issues with like core functionality of uploading and downloading and inserting, and a lot of those things just take time to kind of flush out. So taking a look at,
sure.
yeah, you remember those days.
I remember too well.
Yeah, and so taking a look at this next set, this is really around speed, and so what exactly is the definition here of a quote-unquote library setup? Do you want to take a quick minute to kind of talk about the process that was taken for the setup test?
Yeah, so I was thinking of a BIM manager, how much time does it take, for him hands-on, or him or her hands-on, to set up a library and essentially throw the content at the system and then let the system process it. So what we're seeing a little bit here is that basically some of these other tools, they're indexing things locally. So the system, like let's say it's a BIM manager who's sitting at his workstation, it's his workstation that's doing some of this processing and indexing. And so you, in some cases, have to wait, and you have to wait either for the initial import to happen of kind of the list of files, or you need to do a secondary indexing phase where you'll tell a tool like Content Studio, you'll tell it, please go and collect more information about this from Revit, and it kind of has a batch process of doing that, but it still happens effectively locally. So what we're seeing in Unify is kind of just a small number of button clicks to go from, create library, you kind of throw all the content at it, and literally you pretty much walk away, because from the BIM manager's, the time that he spent on it, that's it. It's going to upload, it's going to index, it's going to become available to the company without hands-on, without more interaction. And that's where this was focused on, seeing how much time it will take for you as a BIM manager to get it working.
Yeah, I think that's one of the values of where we start to see kind of the value of the things we can offload to the cloud, right? And let the cloud kind of do the mining, let it do upgrading. We have some things where you can edit the parameter data now programmatically via our API set, and we're working on UIs to wrap around that as well to make it more exposed. But yeah, so that's really where Power of the Cloud kind of comes into play with some of those different things. Hey, we had a good question here that came up from Jeff. This is going back to the bug slide. Did bugs occur often with the in-pane features within Revit?
I'd have to say probably no. Most of the tools kind of worked okay in pane in Revit. It was more on the import of content side. So when we're uploading or importing content into the system, because some of them are doing local processing, you've probably experienced, when Revit hits something to do with the family and it can't open it without a user interaction, like this constraint is broken or something. So, and then, so now it's kind of not importing properly. It's not doing something that the user expects. And so once the content was loaded into these systems, most of them kind of worked, I guess, as expected, which is pretty cool.
That's great. Okay, so let's take a look at this next slide here, and this is moving on to kind of keyword and searching results, basically. And so I know, it's a very interesting test, and I would imagine that the test set of content was, consistent on all platforms, as with all the rest of these tests. Why is Unify just so far out in front here? What's the big difference?
Yeah, so it's again partly to do with the crunching of the families that's happening in the cloud, rather than kind of having to run a secondary indexing phase, which may take quite a lot of time to get the information in. And in some cases, the metadata that is useful has to be kind of manually added. Whereas with Unify, it's kind of giving you this global search algorithm. If that's what you want to use, you type in chair, and it's going to search across a whole lot of different metadata to do with that content, digging into parameters, names of parameters, values, and so that's, I think, why it was hitting such a high value here, to do with the search algorithm, but also to do with the database of information that it had collected about your content, kind of on the back end. So it was pretty interesting to see this result actually.
So more is not always better, right? And so is there a lot of noise in that 140 results, right? If I search for chair, am I getting plumbing fittings or something just non-relevant? More is not always better, right? So you want to talk about the relevancy of the search results?
Yeah, well, that wasn't really happening. That you were getting a sync when you typed in chair, but with some of the other ones, it wasn't kind of giving you a chair when it should have, and that's where I felt it could have been quite an issue. Your users, like, I uploaded this chair family, and maybe it wasn't entirely obvious that it was a chair. Maybe it was in a parameter somewhere or something. But those other systems just wouldn't have kind of exposed it quite so well. And I guess what that leads to is they just required maybe a bit more management on the file side. Maybe you've got to put a bit more metadata into the file name or something to make it just work. Whereas I was throwing a lot of, I guess, untested or an amalgamation of content into it, and then letting the system kind of do its job and come back to me with results. And yeah, there wasn't many false results in that. It was just giving me what I wanted.
That's interesting. So in wrapping up here, we've got kind of an overall rating comparison, and there's some really powerful software offerings here, and each one of them is going to continue to get better with every release. So these ratings today will be different from next month to next year as the software continually evolves. Luke, in summary of the overall product features, you have Unify leading the pack here by a slim margin. What are your overall summarization of these toolkits? Which ones should folks definitely be considering during evaluation?
Yeah, like we've given a few shout outs to Avail, and I'll do another one. I think it's a great way to get up and running with a content management system, because it's relatively easy to use. A lot of people are jumping on board with it, and it's working well. Content Studio has that nice history of understanding things about Revit content, and it works. It's very tightly integrated with Revit, and it also has an interesting kind of content request workflows that you can see how they've put quite a bit of thought into it. And the CTC tools, it's quite interesting that the basic BIM list browser is kind of accessible to anyone as part of their free toolkit. It's when you want to start to collaborate on an index of content that you have to start kind of paying. So it's definitely something that you can get up and running with kind of without paying. So that's considering some of the competition there of Unify, and there's some stiff competition there. But what we're seeing, Unify did lead the feature results, and we just got to be clear about how we arrived at that number, which was how many features did the product have, and what was the weighting of those different features. So it was not a biased system to apply. It basically was, this feature, you're going to score for it, it's worth this much, and this is the total value. And so Unify led the pack on that, and it just shows how much features you guys, I guess, have spent time in building out and in making available to your users.
Great. Well, thanks for that. We really appreciate your thorough research. And with that, I think what we're going to do is just open it up to questions from the audience here. We've got a ton of questions to sort through, so I'm going to start to select some here. So everyone, please go ahead and if you have any questions, submit them into the Q&A section of the WebEx here, and we're gonna select a couple, and any we don't get to, we will follow up offline here. So here's one here going back a ways. Regarding the data sync. So hold on one second. Okay, so Sarah asked, what do you mean by data sync functionality? I think that was back on the feature list, was it not?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we kind of, I guess we talked about it, but that particular terminology was referring to whether or not the actual Revit files or the actual content element is being synced to a cloud and available to other premises as part of the system. So it was literally the question of cloud versus on-premises, and so that's what that referred to.
Gotcha. Okay. So here's one from Charles. Will Unify check the families for errors prior to import? Kind of. So it doesn't have like an automated fashion to do that during every import, but we have a different toolkit which runs on our same cloud, and that's called our Unify Insights content analysis software. So essentially what that is you can take your entire library, say, hey, go run an audit on this entire library, and it gives you a whole bunch of data visualizations to kind of better understand what content needs to be worked on, what content doesn't match your firm-wide shared parameter files, all sorts of different checks it does. So that's something that, again, if you're interested in that, just contact us and something we can put together for you. But it doesn't kind of do it at import. It does it holistically on your whole library. Let's see, we got another question here. Do the tests include the BIM object Hercules platform? And I don't think it did. Did it, Luke? I'm not
no, so that's relatively a new release. I think at the time, I don't recall it being available at all. And we did look, we looked on their website, and I tried to find a management solution. I couldn't find it at the time, which is a couple of months ago, that we kind of did the majority of this research. So the way we've built it out, the system that we've kind of built is extensible in some ways. It's as you kind of saw, it's essentially a big matrix, a feature matrix, and as time goes on, there'll be ways to perhaps add more products to that comparison, or also change the values as the other products bring out new updates and things like that. So the way that I set it up, I wanted it to be able to be adaptable to the changing landscape.
Okay, so we've got a couple more questions here. Do any of the softwares, Jeff's got a question, do any of the softwares let BIM managers push metadata into a RFA file outside of Revit?
Into an RFA file outside of Revit.
So can you edit the parameter data, from outside of Revit through the tool?
Yeah, so Unify the application, like the standalone desktop application, I think that will let you talk to the piece of content and modify some information about it.
No. The desktop software doesn't let you edit the parameter data today. The only thing on Unify that you can edit parameter data today is via an API. So that's in the toolkit. So it's in the plan. So you can do it programmatically.
Yeah, so you can do it on the cloud side.
Yeah. Correct. We can do it on the cloud side, but it's just not a good UI to interact with it yet.
Yeah. So what that comes back to, is it Jeff? Yeah, Jeff. Basically, that it's a Revit license. So to talk to an RFA file, there's a Revit license in play, and whether it's Unify giving or using one on the API side or the local Revit license, at any time there's kind of a Revit layer to that interaction.
Let's see, how did these, okay, so we got a couple questions here on price points. Rob, Kyle, it says, so did you compare price points as well as dependency on the program? By that I mean, how hard is it to stop using one of these programs if you decide to switch in the future? With the cloud-based CMSs, I think you meant to say, is it easy to quickly get your content off the cloud? So that's kind of a big question. I'll answer that very last piece about getting your content off the cloud. It's, if you look at our T's and C's, you own your content. So even though you're uploading it to our cloud, we don't hold your content hostage or any of those, silly practices. You can download your content anytime that you want. Most of our customers get monthly full library backups anyways, just for mitigation of risk purposes if they lose internet connectivity. So I don't know how other software vendors do it, but from Unify's perspective, you always wholly own 100% your content. We never own it. We only basically have the rights to store it and modify it and send it around to different users of yours across the globe. You're more, Luke, you're closer to the price points from the other vendors. I'm not even sure really what those are. Do you want to talk a little bit about the comparison on the different price points?
Yeah, I had to spend quite a lot of time on this because the different tools, they price things quite differently. You know, you'll have different licensing brackets. You know, one will bracket their licenses, you know, 1 to 10, where one will go 1 to 50, and different price points apply with different amounts of users. You've got things like the flexible licensing models, and some of them have a flat rate you have to pay per year, and you know, so I created a big table of this to essentially be able to, I guess, reduce it down to a user cost, and we did like a graph, users, you know, against cost. And at the time, and I think we'll be pretty open about this, Steve, it showed that Unify was quite you know,
expensive.
It was
Yeah.
the most expensive tool of the lot. And this was part of why we did the research, I guess, for you guys to see how do we compare. And I'll probably let you comment, Steve, as to how you reacted once we saw those cost differences.
Yeah, I mean, we were, you know, as we start going through the research, it was kind of funny. We were like, oh, we're doing good on the features, we're doing good here, we're doing good there, or we've got some issues here, and then we see the price and we go, whoa, like, we were, you know, there's a lot of value there, and there's a great, you know, value add on some of the extra parts of the pieces of the puzzle outside the software from our customer support and all these things, but the price was so much higher than some of these other folks that it made us evaluate, well, where is that really coming from? What type of market is this really addressing? And so we have we basically split out. We adapted. We got this feedback. We internalized it, and then we said, you know what, let's make a change, and we did very quickly. And so we released a small business package, which is targeted at firms that are about 30 users or under. It has a little bit differences around how much support you get, you know, how you can contact support and tutorials and setup. It's a little bit more self-serve, and so it's a little bit different there, whereas, you know, the enterprise version is a lot more hands-on. You get face-to-face interaction and trainings with multiple offices and things. So we kind of adjusted really quickly and said, you know what, let's make sure that we are addressing this other side of the market here and not just kind of positioning this as an enterprise-only solution. And so it was great feedback, and I'm glad we were able to adapt to that feedback pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was really happy to see that, you know, as well, because I kind of knew how good Unify was, but some people were balking at the price. And so once you guys came out with the new price point that applied to kind of small to medium firms, I thought, oh, this is so cool, because, you know, more people are going to be able to get into Unify and start using it. So yeah, well done.
Yeah, that kind of plays nicely into the next question by Charles here. Is there one solution that would be more ideal for an 8-person residential architecture firm? Luke, you want to take that? Yeah,
so I guess the first question at a firm of that size is, you know, you're still probably wondering, should I be doing content management or not? And the answer is yes. So the answer is getting one of them is better than to having none of them, right? So get into content management as soon as you can. And then it's like you do look across some of these features and you go, okay, well, what's more important to me? What's less important? You know, at a small firm, you want to do less time kind of building and managing content. You know, you don't necessarily have a guy there who's full-time making families. So you want the system to do as much work for you as it can. And that's where I would still go, okay, well, you know, the other tools let you index and search across your content, which is very important and good. Whereas Unify is just going to do a bit more work on the back end for me. You know, it's going to be a bit more powerful, and I won't have to kind of, I guess, pay a person to do that work. It's happening within the software. And so that's an important consideration for small firms, I think.
Yeah, time is money, right?
Exactly.
And so I think we'll take one more question, everyone, and we'll look to wrap here. We got a lot of questions, so I apologize if we don't get all your questions. We will answer them via email and follow up with you guys afterwards. So this last one here from Sebastian. Are there any special features that you miss in the Unify software?
So does that mean
maybe in comparison to other apps? I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, not particularly. You know, like I said, during the research, there was unique things about each one, which were, you know, as I came across it, I thought, oh, well, that's cool, you know, we'll add it to the research. But it wasn't like I was looking at Unify saying something big is missing here, because, you know, I'd spent a lot of years with a lot of BIM professionals feeding features to you guys and trying to make sure you had built it out to be as useful as possible. So, yeah, I would probably have to say no to that question, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's take one more. Sorry, there's a good question here. One more, last one here. How easy is it to get content from third parties, and is it free?
Yeah, so in some of the tools, you know, you're going to have to get that content yourself, download it, put it onto your file system, you know, and not to try and pick on anyone, but something like, you know, the CTC kind of on-prem solution, they're not connecting you necessarily with the cloud manufacturer directly. Whereas something like Unify, with the way you guys have done it, you can connect to that manufacturer channel, you can bring it in to your environment and start using it. And it's just, I like how easy it is, you know, because you kind of pick, yes, I want that manufacturer, you know, I want that type of content, bring that into my library, and now I can search across it. So, you know, that workflow is quite nice. It works well.
Great, great. Well, thanks very much, Luke, for spending your time with us today. I really appreciate, you know, the amount of effort you put into this, the tremendous job you did with this thorough research. So hats off, my friend. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I look forward to talking more with some of these folks online as well.
Yeah, thanks everyone for attending today. Again, we'll be sending out the webinar recording to all attendees. If you're also attending Autodesk University, be sure to stop by the Unified booth, say hi, ask us questions. You know, we'd love to get FaceTime with everyone and show you more about the platform, the solution, and answer any questions. But anybody else whose questions we didn't get to today, we will definitely be following up via email, both Luke and myself, and try to get everyone's questions answered. So again, great turnout. Really, really happy everyone took time out of their days to join us today. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you on the next one. All right, take care.